Welcome to Innovating Clinical Trials, the podcast designed for clinical research professionals eager to deepen their understanding of clinical trials through concise, insightful segments. Join your hosts, Eves and Ted Trafford, as they uncover the core issues in clinical research, reflect on the industry, and challenge conventional wisdom.
Liam,
Hello,
good to see you.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been an interesting week so far, just trying to get my bearings, but really excited to talk about what we have on the agenda for today, because I think it's something that quite often we see lots of challenges in clinical trials and why clinical trials go awry. And so the topic for today and the question that I'm going to pose to you is what do you see as effective team leadership in delivering a clinical trial?
Okay. So I think I feel that you need to balance. There's a real heavy balance between stability, innovation, transparency, relationships. You know, I think ultimately it's about focusing on people, because I love this idea of you want to be in a multiplying leadership position, not an additive one. And what I mean by that is that you want to be enabling people. When you enable people and you coach people, it has a multiplying effect, right? Because they become independent thinkers, independent doers. Whereas if you're the type of leader, and I would argue it's probably more management, that you are telling people what to do, they can only operate by when you tell them to do a thing. And equally, if you don't tell them to do something, they may feel worried, concerned about not doing a thing. So I think that's like the sort of real principle for me, is that how do you enable individuals and teams to work together? I love this space. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart, because I love seeing people grow and develop and sort of shine. There's nothing quite rewarding. Better. Yeah. And I think as well is that for me, you are trying to build, I use the analogy of, football or soccer, in which that you don't want everyone, or you can't have everyone being a striker trying to score goals. You need a variety of different players with different skill sets on a pitch to make up a team. And I think this is a really critical factor, and it's actually one of the plays that I will use when looking at who am I working with as part of a clinical trial delivery team, to say, first and foremost, like the play one is, I think of these things as a playbook, if you will. So play one is around setting the vision and aligning the team. And really what you want is you want to start with the end in mind. So you want a very clear vision of what you need to achieve, and be realistic about it as well, and getting other people's inputs into it, because it's important to define what success looks like, as well as the impacts if we're not successful, and to identify some of those risks and concerns, which is obviously just 101. But it's in doing that, you really want to build a very cohesive, which is play two, which is, how do you build a cohesive and very multidisciplinary team? And I think that multidisciplinary is a critical part in terms of the technical skill sets that people have. But I also would caveat that it's just as important to have people who think differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm part, because I call this beach ball thinking, in which that if you and I are in a room with a group of people, everyone gets really close up to the problems, and everyone may see the same color, which, they say, oh, what color do you see? I see red. And it's because everyone's staring at the same panel of the ball, because we all think in a very similar way. And I think that's dangerous. I really do genuinely think it's dangerous, because I want friction on that team, because the friction is me saying, I see red, and you saying, I see yellow. Because what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to get as many colors of that panel on that beach ball as possible, to get a true comprehensive and holistic view. Ultimately, we want the team to step back and say it's a multicolored beach ball, not just a color. And I think that you only get that when you foster an environment where every team member's voice is heard, respected, we're patient with people. I give a good example is an organization I used to work with. I was pretty young in comparison to colleagues by 20 plus years. And often they would just talk over my thoughts until one of a group coach said, just stop and listen to Liam for a second. And they did. And the sort of lights went on and they realized that my superpower is connecting dots, if you will, and seeing sort of insights. And they realized that that was a superpower of mine. So all of a sudden when I spoke, forevermore, they would stop and listen because they recognized a particular skill set that they had that wasn't inherent in the team. So I think that understanding where people's positions are, not in a hierarchical need, but who has...
But their value to the team.
Exactly. Because the reality is there's like almost like a believability weighting around that. Is if I talk something about, let's say, for instance, like wildlife photography, I don't know anything about wildlife, but because you do, your believability weighting is substantially higher than mine, and therefore you should have the biggest voice at the table. But that doesn't mean that my voice should be quiet, because I may have a different way of seeing how to, take a picture of a bird or something like that, and it may be useful, it may not be, but it's important that everyone's and really need for that. You need, which is play 3, which is around like fostering these very open and transparent communication. That's an enabler in which that everyone does have a voice. They may not be weighted all the same, but we're seeking for the best ideas. So yeah, there's about 10 different plays that I use, but they're really the sort of top 3, which, just to summarize, is that being able to set a vision and to be able to align the team to that, and that's a team effort. Yeah, you may as the leader be setting that vision, but you want to encourage people to input into it, and then you want as many different multi-skilled, multidisciplinary individuals. A good example of this is one of the best person I've ever had for helping organizations with enrollment was actually an engineer. So it didn't come from marketing or anything like that. He effectively worked at a factory, but he understood bottlenecks, theory of constraints, and things that were the most important. So I put him in charge of enrollment, and he was amazing because he could produce all the reports, understood the process, and so on and so forth from a factory perspective, and was massively. So I'd encourage people to get a wide range of people there. And then obviously as a centre, cornerstone to that is how do you foster those open and transparent communication? And there's 1,000,001 other things, of course, with leadership. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have more questions than thoughts.
Okay,
this is fascinating, and yeah, I really identify with what you're saying. And so the first question is, in the context of a clinical trial, you work at a pharmaceutical company and you're part of the clinical operations group, and you are given a set of individuals to work with on the study. How do you very quickly identify, their strengths, weaknesses, so that you can see where the gaps might be?
Great question. I think first and foremost is having conversations with people, and often just asking the question. One of my favorite questions to highlight this, I ask everyone that I speak to. One is, what is your superpowers? People usually know that, and they'll say, or to expand on that is, what are the things that you seem to do effortlessly where other people really struggle with? And the second is, what does an ideal, and that obviously sort of tells us where their strengths are. It also, in a sort of white space sort of problem solving, is that it also tells us what their biggest problems are. So for instance, if I say, my superpower is an easy one is I'm ridiculously motivated and driven. But also the flip side of that is I could potentially walk all over people unintentionally because I'm driven to achieve a goal. The second is, what does a fantastic day like? What does a fantastic day look like? Or what is a great problem you really like to tackle? And with that, you can then start to uncover their problem skills, like, what are the things that they really enjoy. Because we do the things that we're inherently good at, and we enjoy doing more of those than the things we're rubbish at, right? So I think that with those two questions unlocks a great deal. So I think that it's ultimately sitting down and talking with people, building some sort of relationship and asking them a few questions that can unlock that. I think that just interesting questions you can ask rather than, how do you process problems or something like that? Because ultimately, if they're in a position, you'll know their technical expertise. If they're in data management, you know that it's data management. But actually what you're interested in is more around their problem solving and where their superpowers are.
That's amazing. So conversations, key questions. What other things? So the clinical trial is underway.
Mm-hmm.
How do you then lead that team through big challenges in a clinical trial?
There's sometimes you have to lead from the front, right? So you have to say, for instance, time doesn't promote it. I would recommend, not in all instances, but in a lot of where time doesn't promote, you don't have time on your side, or there's a lot of just people looking at each other. They're looking for leadership, and sometimes you have to lead from the front. So it may be a case of you have to set, you have to put the flag in the ground and say, right, guys, and be honest as well, saying, okay, we're going to go towards this direction. We don't know if it's going to solve the problem, but we're going to take, small steps, and we're going to touch base with each other, every so often. And if we need to adapt and change that flag on new information, we will do. So I think that is something that's I found useful if there's a lack of time, and also if everyone's sort of looking to leadership to solve. The other area is, if you have some time to solve it, then the coaching process is really good. I've always found really good, in which just ask questions of the team, get them talking. This is a great trick I learned in a negotiation course. And I was doing this negotiation course as a very young individual, and the rest of these people were seasoned negotiators. And the coach told me, he said, right, first thing I want you to do is don't sit down, just get the whiteboard marker and stand at the whiteboard and just see what happens. And so I walked into the room, just went up to the whiteboard, and then all these grey-haired guys turned to me as if I didn't know what to do after that point, admittedly, but they turned to face me. So one thing I've liked to do in the past is to say, okay, who really relishes the opportunity to lead, and is there any way in which that we can put them and give them, like, for instance, it may be a person who is going to be responsible for the delivery of the thing, therefore it makes sense for them to be, the whiteboard essentially, and marking that up. So sometimes I would work with an individual prior and say, okay, we're going to have a meeting, we're going to discuss what the problems are, we're going to discuss what some of the options, and we're going to frame this so that you can lead it, and I'll be there to help just guide that meeting along. But ultimately people need to be looking at you, and this comes down to the multiplication, leadership and multiplication, is that you want to be in a position to be empowering those people. So it's not just your ideas that are winning out. So they're just a couple of the things I've done in the past. But it's about empowering people and people, making people feel that they can be the ones that are making change.
Amazing. I've learned so much today. Appreciate you sharing this. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you, Ted. Appreciate it. Speak soon, sir.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.
Bye.